This is Deep Dive, a look into Atlantis, the Lost Empire. I'm Jules Caldera. Atlantis, the Lost Empire was released June 15th, 2001 by Walt Disney Pictures. It was directed by Gary Truesdale and Kirk Wise, who together also directed Beauty and the Beast and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. The story centers around Milo Thatch, a young linguist recruited by a friend of his late grandfather's to join a crew searching for the fabled lost city of Atlantis. While this is not a definitively science fiction film, it nonetheless embodies some of the semantics of the genre. One of the major conventions is that of Atlantis itself. It's presented as once being a utopia, with thriving culture, until a disaster caused it to sink beneath the waves. However, by the time Milo and the crew find the city, it more closely represents a dystopia. Isolated, their way of life dying, and no one can even read Atlantean to discover how to return to their past. Another semantic, as noted in our lectures, is that of aliens, or in this case, creatures that are exclusively indigenous to Atlantis. From the monsters they encounter on their way to the multi-eyed creatures they eat, their journey is fraught with the unknown. In a more conventional sci-fi film, they would encounter such creatures perhaps on an entirely different planet. There are also some instances of iconography used in the film. As Sobchak notes in regards to spaceships at times being represented as a quote good technology, this too can apply to the Ulysses in Atlantis. When Milo steps on the bridge as they descend into the unknown fathoms, we watch this beautiful craft embark and we feel that this is the beginning of an epic adventure. While the crystal is not a recurring icon in sci-fi, it's nonetheless become an object that fans immediately associate with this film, just as others have with spaceships or lightsabers. This is not only a testament to the art of the film, but also the important narrative and emotional impact that the crystals wield. As with nearly every great sci-fi adventure, the sound effects play a key role in setting the tone. In Atlantis, the sounds envelop us in this world, blending World War I era combat and adventure with that of a fantastic society whose technology far surpasses our own. The biggest example of such technology, quite literally, is that of the Leviathan, the massive guardian of Atlantis. They believe it to be a monster until Milo looks it in the eye, as seen here. Another use of sound effects is with the Atlantean vehicles, all carved as fish that fly through the air and fire lightning at enemies, with effects more science fiction than adventure. Let's take a look.
Holy smokes! You told me he only had guns!
What I said was he's never surprised!
Things are getting good.
Vinny, heads up! We can't let him reach the top of that shaft! Ah! Vinny, new plan. You and me, we're gonna be decoys. Audrey, sweet, fly up underneath that thing and cut her loose.
We're on it. Lieutenant!
As I mentioned, this is not a straight science fiction film, but rather an adventure film set in 1914 that has elements of sci-fi that are integral to the story. While not necessarily explicit in the film, there are metaphors, allegories, and ideologies that can be read or interpreted from it nonetheless. The Ulysses expedition itself, signified by its great displays of innovative machinery, such as the submarine or Mole's digger shown here, as well as its brute force methods of exploration, which we'll touch on later, serves as a metaphor for American industrialization. In the 1910s, the American economy was on the rise as factories began mass-producing numerous products and monopolies began to form. Related to that, the expedition can also be a metaphor for capitalism. While Milo is truly passionate about Atlantis, the rest of the crew is in it for the money, and they tell him so. Rourke even refers to himself as an adventure capitalist. In the film's climax, after the crystal has merged with Kida, Rourke locks her in a container with the intention of selling her to the highest bidder. Along these lines, the city of Atlantis is the metaphorical representation of past civilizations who have been exploited and wiped out to the point of losing their identity, or in this case their very life force. We're also able to note the allegories present within the narrative, the first being the plundering of history. Throughout history, countless colonizers have invaded indigenous civilizations, taken their riches, and sold them for profit with no regard for their meaning or cultural significance. Through Rourke and the others, we see this present in Atlantis as well. They've taken the job solely for the money, not for any historical or cultural enrichment. Through this plundering and lack of care, there's a disregard for the past, as we can see in this clip.
Half a mile high, at least. It must have taken hundreds, thousands of years to carve this thing.
Hey, look, I made a bridge. It only took me 10 seconds. 11 tops.
While Milo revels in their discovery, Vinny finds the fastest way to keep the expedition moving without any concern for the history in front of him. If other archaeological expeditions to Egypt or Greece had done such things, it would be a travesty, but here it's played for laughs. The ideological statements put forth by Atlantis can be summarized twofold. First, history is not a commodity. It's not something to be monetized for financial gain, especially at the expense of those whose history or culture you're exploiting for profit. The other is also a theme of the film, which is to find where you belong. From the beginning, Milo feels like and is treated as an outcast. He's sequestered in the boiler room and is the laughingstock of his office, and even the crew treats him differently for a decent portion of the film. When he gets to Atlantis, however, Milo begins to thrive. He's in his element, able to read a long-lost language and help them regain their culture, and ultimately saves Atlantis. By the end of the film, Milo marries Kita and takes his place in a land where he feels at home for the first time, which is something that everyone should strive for. The film's cast is predominantly male, with a small handful of women both in lead and supporting roles. However, it is notable that the women here aren't one-dimensional or written to serve as foils to the men. They're all well-rounded characters with personalities and goals and agency over their actions. Most of the women are also in positions of power or are authoritative, with none of them playing the meek stereotype that may have been prevalent in the 1910s. Kita, of course, is a princess and heir to the throne of Atlantis. She can fight, she's resourceful, she's curious, and is different from many princesses within the history of Disney. Helga, Rourke's second-in-command, is tough, no-nonsense, and suffers no fools, including Rourke himself. Audrey, though young and in no position of authority, is still her own person who isn't afraid to tell people what to do, and has her own dreams of opening another auto shop with her father. The gender stereotypes in this film are minimal. None of the characters truly fall into boxes of traditional gender roles, and in fact subvert them. In Judith Newton's essay Feminism and Anxiety and Alien, she discusses the fantasy that has existed since the 19th century that, quote, white middle-class women, once integrated into the world of work, will somehow save us from its worst excesses and specifically from its dehumanization, end quote. In Atlantis, not only do we have women in very prominent roles on the Ulysses, which subverts the norms of 1914, but Helga subverts the additional norm of the pure-hearted woman that will save the men from the dangers of capitalistic excess. Rather, she plays a key role in such excess. Given that this is a film primarily for children, there's not a lot of overt sexuality within it. The men, for instance, are completely non-sexualized and at times even under-sexualized. Sweet, the crew's medical officer, is a big, muscular man who's first shown in a lab coat with no undershirt. In a more adult film, this might be played up more as eye candy, but not here. On the other hand, two of the women, Helga and Kita, are briefly sexualized. Kita does wear slightly revealing clothing throughout the film, but it isn't until she and Milo go to swim that we see this shot of her. Milo is agog, and when she asks if he swims, he tells her, "Oh, I swim, pretty girl. Good." This passive sexualization is contrast to that of Helga, who takes an active role. Early in the film, when Milo returns home, he finds Helga waiting for him, very much in the vein of a noir femme fatale. She drops her coat around her shoulders to appear more seductive in order to convince Milo to go with her, or at least to maintain his attention. The crew of the Ulysses is fairly diverse in animation as well as voice acting. It fits into Borlaski's idea of how race is approached in sci-fi films by, instead of one or two white characters, having a diverse setting in a world in which whiteness is not the default. Sweet is half black, half native, and voiced by a black actor. Audrey is Hispanic, voiced by an actress of Argentine descent, and Vinny is Italian-American, voiced by an actor of Italian-American descent. It's interesting that such a crew would also be put together in 1914, when diversity wasn't exactly America's strong suit. Rourke and the rest of the crew are predominantly white, filling the role of the colonizers in our allegory. The Atlanteans, by contrast, are non-white with little diversity in skin tone. They don't represent any other ethnicity outside of being from Atlantis. However, their clothing and overall appearance are reminiscent of other cultures, such as in South America and others. As with race, Atlantis also has representations of class across a broad spectrum. We have the working class, represented in Audrey and Vinny, with their blue-collar jobs on the expedition, as well as the majority of Atlanteans. There's also middle-class characters such as Milo, Sweet, and Helga, who all appear to have means and comfortability, especially with Milo's government job and Sweet's medical degree. Again, there are some Atlanteans, particularly the royal guards and those whose homes we visit, that seem to be more middle class. Of course, Kita and her father would fall into the upper class or elite, given their status as royalty and the fortune they gave everyone in thanks for their help, as would Preston Whitmore, the wealthy eccentric who funded the entire expedition, and was also able to have an aquarium full of coelacanths, fish thought to be extinct until 1938, which suggests Preston knew something others didn't. The ideologies posited by these representations of class would include, of course, capitalism and oppression, as put forth by the money-driven expedition who are willing to let a civilization die for a quick buck, as well as that of monarchy, which is still greatly respected in Atlantean culture, and even those who pass on have their likeness carved in stone to watch from above the city. Since this isn't a true sci-fi film, and given the time period, there's very little artificial intelligence depicted in Atlantis. The only thing that could be considered as such would be the Leviathan, which we know to be a sentient machine. There's no real transhumanism in the film either, with a possible exception of the crystals Atlanteans wear around their necks. While not technology, the crystals can still be used to heal wounds, which is an improvement of the human condition. Given that Atlanteans were not aware of the capabilities of the fish vehicles, since they could not read the instructions, they have very little reliance on technology, save for lesser tech such as boats or primitive weaponry. The Ulysses crew, however, is quite reliant on technology. After all, it's what got them to Atlantis in the first place. From their vehicles to their weaponry and Vinny's explosives, they've never not needed technology to succeed. An ideology that can be inferred from this representation of technology is that too much of it can diminish one's culture. Atlanteans have almost none, and they still embrace a way of life from thousands of years ago with no outside influences, while those who do have technology seem to have very little. The cold steel of the submarine and their equipment is no substitute for the warmth and beauty that surrounds Atlantis, even so far beneath the waves. After the film's release, Atlantis was able to turn a profit globally. However, in the United States, the box office results were lackluster and didn't allow the film to break even. Because of the disappointing performance, Disney quietly canceled a spin-off television series with 3 episodes already completed, being compiled into one feature-length film and released as a direct-to-video sequel called Atlantis: Milo's Return. Plans to reinvent Disneyland's submarine voyage attraction were also trashed. Since the film's release, there has been quite a resurgence in its popularity, and it is now considered a cult classic. There are also thriving internet communities, particularly on Facebook, which are dedicated to the Atlantis fandom and act as a place for fans to share theories, fan art, or just to sing its praises together. One such group, as seen here, boasts 30,000 members, many of whom are active, including the film's writer, Tab Murphy, co-directors Truesdale and Wise, as well as producer Don Hahn. There's also a much smaller group that focuses on deciphering and learning the Atlantean language, which is a testament to how serious some portions of the fandom take this film and really illustrates the impact it has had. That's my presentation. Thanks for watching.